Imagine the number 99.9%. It is a staggering, almost impossible figure when applied to human history. It means that for nearly every single human being who has ever drawn breath, from the first flickering campfires of the Rift Valley to the dawn of the Industrial Age, birth did not happen in a sterile room, on a white mattress, or lying flat on a back. For 99.9% of our existence, the experience of bringing life into the world was a vertical one. Picture yourself there, standing on the packed, cool earth of a cave floor. Feel the grit between your toes and the rough, damp stone of the wall against your palms. Your legs are trembling, the muscles in your thighs burning with a deep, rhythmic fire, but you do not sit down. You cannot sit down. Your ancestors knew something that we have spent the last 3 centuries trying to forget. They knew that in this moment, gravity was not an enemy to be fought, but the most powerful ally they had. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke and crushed herbs, and the only light comes from the orange dance of a dying fire, but there is a profound, ancient logic to your posture. You are upright because your body, shaped by millions of years of evolutionary struggle, demands it. You are part of a lineage that survived because it learned to use the weight of the world to its advantage. This is the story of how we became the only species on Earth to turn a biological necessity into a mechanical puzzle, and why, for almost all of time, the answer to that puzzle was to stand tall. The feet were the first thing to change. If we want to understand why your ancestors stood their ground during the most intense moments of their lives, we have to travel back nearly 6 million years. Long before we were builders of cities or tellers of stories, we were creatures of the transition. Our ancestors, like the famous Ardipithecus ramidus, nicknamed Ardi, who lived roughly 4.4 million years ago in what is now Ethiopia, were beginning to make a choice. Ardi was a strange mosaic of a creature, with hands that could still grasp branches but a pelvis that was starting to show the telltale signs of a new way of moving. Scientists like Dr. Owen Lovejoy have spent decades peering at these fossilized remains, trying to map the moment we rose onto 2 legs. Walking on 2 feet, or bipedalism, was a radical experiment. It freed our hands to carry tools and food, but it demanded a total redesign of the human chassis. In a 4-legged animal, like a chimpanzee or a cow, the internal organs hang like a hammock from the spine. The pelvis is long and flat, acting more like a tail anchor than a support beam. But when we stood up, everything changed. Our organs shifted, pressing downward. To keep us from literally falling apart, the human pelvis had to shrink. It became a compact, bowl-shaped structure, pulling tight to stabilize our weight over our center of gravity. This narrowness was a gift for the traveler, making us the most efficient long-distance walkers on the planet. But for a species that also needed to pass a new life through that same pelvic bowl, it was the beginning of a biological crisis. The bone had reached its limit. While our hips were getting narrower to support our wanderlust, our minds were heading in the opposite direction. About 2.3 million years ago, a creature we now call Homo habilis appeared on the scene. Their brains were roughly 600 cubic centimeters, a significant jump from their ancestors. But the expansion didn't stop there. By the time modern Homo sapiens emerged, that volume had more than doubled, reaching an average of 1,400 cubic centimeters. This is the core of what anthropologists call the obstetrical dilemma, a term famously coined by Sherwood Washburn in 1960. Washburn pointed out the brutal irony of our evolution. The very thing that made us human, our massive brains, was on a collision course with the very thing that let us walk, our narrow hips. This wasn't just a tight squeeze, it was a mechanical impossibility. Evolution had to find a way to thread a large, bony sphere through a narrow, rigid hoop. To survive, the human infant had to learn a complex, twisting dance. Unlike a baby monkey, which can slide through the birth canal in a straight line, a human baby must rotate as it descends, turning its head and then its shoulders to find the path of least resistance through the jagged geometry of the mother's bones. Every millimeter in that passage became a matter of life or death. In a system with such razor-thin margins, you cannot afford to waste space. The solution was a mechanical secret hidden in the spine. If you lie flat on your back, you are effectively closing the door on the baby's exit. It sounds counterintuitive to a modern ear, but the physics are undeniable. In the 1960s, An obstetrician named J.G.B. Russell used radiographic imaging to measure what actually happens to the human pelvis when we change position. His findings, published in 1969, were a revelation. When a person moves from a lying position to a squat or a supported standing position, the bones of the pelvis actually shift. The sacrum, that large triangular bone at the base of your spine, is not a fixed wall. It is a swinging gate. When you are upright, the sacrum can tilt backward, and the tailbone can move out of the way. Russell discovered that this simple shift in posture can increase the diameter of the pelvic outlet by up to 30%. Imagine a doorway that suddenly becomes a third wider just because you stood up. For an ancient mother in a cave, that 30% wasn't just a statistic, it was the difference between a successful birth and a tragedy that ended 2 lives. By standing, she was also recruiting the most consistent force in the universe, gravity. Instead of having to push the baby uphill against the curve of her own spine, as one must do when lying down, the upright mother lets the earth itself do the heavy lifting. The weight of the baby and the amniotic fluid presses down directly on the cervix, encouraging it to open faster and more efficiently. The body was a map with 2 different destinations. But the advantages of the upright stance go deeper than just bone and gravity. There is a hidden danger in the lying position that ancient humans avoided without ever knowing the name for it. Deep inside the torso, running right along the front of the spine, are 2 of the most important blood vessels in the body, the aorta and the inferior vena cava. When a person in the late stages of pregnancy lies flat on their back, the entire weight of the baby, the placenta, and the uterus, often weighing 15 pounds or more, crashes down directly onto these vessels. This is known in modern medicine as supine hypotensive syndrome. It can partially collapse the vessels, restricted the flow of oxygen-rich blood to the mother's heart and, more critically, to the baby. Our ancestors didn't have monitors to tell them when a baby's heart rate was dropping, but they had instinct. They felt the lightheadedness and the shortness of breath that comes when those vessels are compressed, and they moved. They stood, they leaned, and they swayed. By staying vertical, they kept the supply lines open. This allowed the mother to stay conscious and strong, and it kept the baby's brain fueled with oxygen during the most stressful minutes of its life. It was a perfect system of biological engineering, honed over 100,000 generations of trial and error. History leaves a trail of stones. We don't have to guess that they did this. The evidence is carved into the very earth they walked on. In 2001, at the ancient Egyptian site of Abydos, archaeologist Joseph Wegner uncovered a remarkable artifact from roughly 3,700 years ago. It was a birthing brick, vibrantly painted and perfectly preserved. In ancient Egypt, the standard way to give birth was to squat on 2 of these mud bricks, leaving a gap in the center. The goddess of childbirth, Meskenet, was often depicted as one of these very bricks with a human head. This wasn't just a tradition, it was a medical protocol. The Egyptian hieroglyph for birth actually shows a woman in a squatting position with the baby's head emerging beneath her. This verticality is a universal thread that runs through almost every ancient culture. In the ruins of Pompeii and throughout the Roman Empire, we find birthing chairs, sturdy, U-shaped seats designed to keep the mother upright while providing a cutout for the baby to pass through. Cyrenus of Ephesus, a physician writing in the 2nd century, gave detailed instructions on how to use these chairs to ensure the mother's safety. From the Mayan reliefs in Central America to the traditional oral histories of West Africa, the story is the same. Whether it was leaning against a tree, gripping a rope suspended from a hut's rafters, or being supported by the strong arms of a grandmother, the human birth was a vertical event. Then came the shadow of a crown. So, how did we lose 1,000,000 years of wisdom in just 3 centuries? The answer is a strange cocktail of royal ego and the rise of a new kind of professional. There is a persistent story in medical history involving King Louis XIV of France, the Sun King. Legend says that Louis had a voyeuristic fascination with the process of birth, particularly when it came to his many mistresses. He allegedly preferred them to lie flat on their backs on a table so that he could have a clear, unobstructed view of the proceedings. Because the king's word was law, and the court followed the king, this spectacle position became the height of fashion among the French aristocracy. While historians like Dr. Caroline Ticknor note that we should be careful about blaming the entire shift on one man's whims, the story reflects a very real change in power dynamics. For thousands of years, the birthing room was a female space, governed by midwives who prioritized the mother's comfort and the baby's descent. But in the 17th and 18th centuries, the man midwife, or obstetrician, began to take over. These early doctors brought with them new tools, most notably the forceps, a secret kept for years by the Chamberlain family. Forceps were a miracle of their time, but they were almost impossible to use if the mother was squatting or standing. To make the doctor's job easier, to give him a better view and a more stable work surface, the mother was put on the bed. The doctor's convenience became the mother's cage. By the time the 19th century arrived, the shift was nearly complete in the Western world. Birth had moved from the home to the hospital, and the bed had become the standard. This was a massive win for the medicalization of birth, as it allowed doctors to perform exams and interventions with much greater ease. But it was a catastrophic loss for the biomechanics of the human body. When you put a laboring person on their back, you are essentially asking them to push a heavy weight through a tunnel that has been narrowed by 30%, all while fighting gravity and risking the compression of their major arteries. We traded the wisdom of 99.9% of our history for the convenience of the person holding the clipboard. We forgot that the sacrum needs to move. We forgot that the pelvis needs to open. We began to view birth as a medical emergency waiting to happen, rather than a physical process that requires movement. This lying down model became so dominant that even our art and our movies reflected it, making the ancient, vertical way look strange or even primitive to our modern eyes. Modern science finally caught up to the cave. However, the data is starting to tell a different story, one that sounds suspiciously like the whispers of our ancestors. In the last few decades, massive scientific reviews have begun to look at the outcomes of different birthing positions. A major Cochrane review, led by researcher Jane Gupta and involving thousands of participants, found that when mothers were in upright positions, standing, sitting, or kneeling, the second stage of labor was significantly shorter. There were fewer instances of fetal heart rate distress and a lower need for vacuum or forceps assistance. The studies confirmed that the ancient way was not just natural, it was more efficient. It turns out that the women in the caves of France and the villas of Rome weren't being primitive, they were being practical. They were following the path of least resistance designed into their very DNA. Even the most modern hospitals are now beginning to reintroduce birthing balls, squatting bars, and active labor protocols, essentially trying to recreate the freedom of movement that our ancestors never gave up in the first place. The bones have a memory longer than our records. There is another piece to this puzzle that explains why the upright position was so vital for the survival of our species. It's called the EGG hypothesis, or the energetics, gestation, and growth hypothesis, put forward by researchers like Dr. Holly Dunsworth in 2012. Dunsworth challenged the old obstetrical dilemma by suggesting that we don't give birth because our pelvises are too small, but because the mother's metabolism simply cannot keep up with the demands of the growing baby anymore. At 9 months, a human baby's brain is so energy-hungry that the mother would have to consume an impossible amount of calories to keep it growing inside the womb. So, we are born early. We are born helpless, with brains that are only about a quarter of their adult size, so that we can do our real growing in the outside world. This unfinished state of the human infant makes the act of birth even more social. A human mother cannot easily give birth alone. She needs a tribe. She needs someone to catch the baby as it performs that final, twisting rotation. In the ancient world, the upright position wasn't just about physics, it was about community. Standing allowed the midwives and the grandmothers to be right there, supporting the mother's weight, providing a counterpressure to her back, and welcoming the new arrival into the circle of the firelight. We are the children of the 99.9%. This brings us to the grandmother hypothesis, a fascinating idea championed by anthropologist Kristen Hawkes. It suggests that one of the reasons human females live so long after their reproductive years, unlike almost any other mammal, is because grandmothers played a vital role in the survival of their grandchildren. In the ancient birthing room, the grandmother was the keeper of the vertical knowledge. She was the one who knew which tree to lean against, which rope to pull, and how to position the birthing bricks. She was the bridge between the biology of the body and the culture of the tribe. When we look at the history of upright birth, we aren't just looking at a physical posture. We are looking at the very thing that made us a successful, cooperative species. We survived the impossible squeeze of the big brain through the narrow pelvis because we learned to work together, and we learned to work with the planet. We turned the struggle for life into a shared, vertical victory. The dirt is still beneath us, even if we can't feel it. We have spent 300 years pretending that we are separate from the rules of the cave, that we can innovate our way out of the fundamental mechanics of our own skeletons. But every time a laboring person instinctively gets out of bed to pace the hallway, or finds themselves swaying their hips during a contraction, that 99.9% is speaking. The body remembers the 99.9%. It remembers the cool earth under the feet. It remembers the way the sacrum opens like a gate when the weight is off the spine. It remembers that we are vertical creatures, built for the long walk and the tall stance. The modern bed may be comfortable for the observer, and the hospital monitor may provide a sense of security, but they cannot change the geometric truth written in our bones 6 million years ago. We are a species defined by a trade-off: the ability to think and the ability to walk. And for nearly the entire history of our kind, the only way to reconcile those two things was to stand up. Look down at your own feet for a moment. Feel the way your heels press into the floor and the way your arches support the entire weight of your history. That sensation, that simple connection between your body and the ground, is the exact same one felt by every woman who ensured your existence by standing her ground in a flickering circle of firelight. They didn't have textbooks or X-rays, but they had the undeniable gravity of the earth pulling at their center. They stood because they had to, because the margin for error was measured in millimeters, and because they knew that the upright path was the only path that led to a future. We may have covered that dirt with linoleum and tucked those ancient instincts under starched white sheets, but the mechanical truth hasn't shifted by a single degree. For 99.9% of our time on this planet, birth was a vertical act of defiance against the impossible. To forget that isn't just a loss of tradition, it is a rejection of the very physics that allowed you to be here. In the end, the most chilling reality of our modern world is how easily we convinced ourselves that the mattress was safer than the mountain. We traded 1,000,000 years of gravity for 3 centuries of convenience, but your bones are still waiting for you to stand up. They are still waiting for you to remember that the most defining moment of being human was never meant to happen lying down. Every heartbeat in your body is a debt owed to a woman who chose the dirt over the bed and gravity over the crown. You are here because she stood, and in the silent, pressurized logic of the human pelvis, that is the only argument that has ever mattered. If we can rewrite something as fundamental as the way we enter the world, what else have we quietly discarded? What other ancient, life-saving instincts have we traded for a better view? Perhaps it's time we stop looking at the progress of the last 3 centuries and start looking back at the 99.9%. Because when the world gets heavy and the margins get thin, the earth is still there, waiting to help you carry the weight. You just have to be willing to stand on it. Why do you think we still feel that urge to pace when we are anxious, or to stand when we are challenged? Could it be that our bodies are still trying to tell us how to survive? Let us know in the comments if you think we've lost more than we've gained by moving away from our ancient instincts, and subscribe if you want to keep digging into the hidden stories of how we became human. The fire is still burning, and the circle is still open. All you have to do is find your footing. Remember the grit between your toes and the cool, damp stone against your palms. That feeling isn't a memory, it's an instruction. It's the 99.9% calling you home to the earth, reminding you that you were built to stand tall, even when the world is trying to pull you down.